Hello everybody, this is Dave of Blue Bears Games. Welcome back to our Blues Budget Brews series. This week we ended up having to change directions. I was waiting once again for my stuff to come in for other videos, and we had run into some situations. We still have the pandemic going, so even if that's not the case, it still delayed everything coming in. So two things got delayed. I did some orders for some other decks. I was going to do a regular deck this week, not a budget one. They got the order that I put in for those got delayed, and then the Zendikar Rising order that I put in months, not even months, weeks I'll say, because it's probably been about 2 months, but we'll go with weeks. It was released almost 2 weeks ago and still hasn't even been shipped out because of delays with production. So I've been meaning to put this deck up anyway, but I was hoping to do it a little later. So for this week, we're doing Blues Budget Brews, with all that being said. And this week, we're doing Grumgully the Generous. I like this deck. It has very, very good possibilities of going infinite if you had no budgetary restrictions. So I'll explain all of that as I go through the deck. But first, let me explain to you Grumgully. So Grumgully is 1 green, 1 red, 1 of any for a 3/3. So 3 to cast, 3 converted mana cost for a 3/3 right off the bat. We're good on, power toughness conversion for converted mana cost. It's a Goblin Shaman. And his ability is that each other non-human creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. And that enables quite a bit. So for the direction I went with for this build, I went with obviously goblins, but not totally goblins. It's not 100% goblins. It is more like goblin token, swarm. So let's go through the deck and I'll show you what I got here. And remember, every deck I make in the budget series, they're for sale. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so let me zoom out correctly so that we can view everything. So I always start with lands on my budget, on all my deck videos. So we start with the Temple of Abandon because it is the green-red or Gruul dual colors. And it comes into play tapped, and you can scry 1. The Guild Gate, another one, comes into play tapped. These are all comes into play tapped with either an ability or nothing. Just they tap for one or the other. The Kazandu Refuge comes into play tapped, and you can gain a life. Same thing with the Rugged Highlands. Shivan Oasis just comes into play tapped. There's no bonus with it. Same with Timber Gorge. And then I used Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse just to kind of thin the decks out. Budgetary restrictions say you can't use fetch lands for anything, so because they pretty much take over all the cost of a deck. Tranquil Thicket, it's the green cycle land, so it comes into play tapped. It taps it at a green, and you can cycle it for a green. Slippery Karst, again, another version of the cycle lands. It cycles for 2, colorless. Forgotten Cave is the red one. It cycles for a red. Smoldering Crater is the one that cycles for 2 colorless. Gruul Turf is the bounce land. It adds green and red, and then when it comes into play tapped, and you return a land you control to its owner's hand. Blighted Woodland, it taps. It doesn't come into play tapped, so that's a bonus for that. It adds a colorless, or for a green and 3, you can sacrifice it and search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, and put them onto the battlefield tapped, so you can thin your deck out that way too. And then basically, we're mostly mountains because this deck is heavy on the red, and then a couple forests. I will have the deck list up in the description for you guys, so you can see the exact counts for the lands if you want, and for the deck list for, they pop up when you hover over them. All right, so next section is ramp and deck thinning. We went with Rampant Growth, 2 to cast, sorcery, search your library for a basic land card, and put it into play tapped and then shuffle your library. Untamed Wilds, it's 3 to cast for the same thing, search your library for any 1 basic land and put it into play. It does not come into play tapped though. Grow from the Ashes, 3 to cast with kicker of 2, so it could be 5. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And if the spell was kicked, instead search your library for 2 basic lands and put them onto the battlefield. Journey of Discovery, 3 with Entwine of 3. So you can choose one or both if you entwine it. And it's search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put them in your hand, and then the other part is you can play up to 2 additional lands this turn. Alright, Beneath the Sands, 3 to cast, search your library for basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle your library. But you can also, if you're later in the game, don't need the land, you can cycle this away for 2. Explosive Vegetation is 4. You search your library for 2 basic land cards, up to, by the way. I don't know why anybody wouldn't get 2 unless, you don't have enough, but up to 2 basic land cards and put them into play tapped and then shuffle your library. And Seek the Horizon. So 4 to cast, sorcery, search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, reveal them and put them in your hand and then shuffle your library. So bunch of different ways to get the ramp in, get them out of your deck and onto the battlefield without having to actually draw them. Alright, so we are Goblin token making. But not everything in this deck is a Goblin. Not everything makes a token that's a Goblin. But the main focus is on Goblins just because the color combination and what he does makes sense for mostly Goblins. But not everything. So here's the creatures I chose for this build. Each actual choice has a reason. They might be minimal effects, but minimal effects add up. So at first we have Goblin Banneret, 1 to cast 1/1 Goblin Soldier, has Mentor, which means whenever this creature attacks, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power. The whole hope is that you have Grumgully out for this. This deck is not needed to have the commander out. It works way better with it, though. Anyway, so it also has the ability for 1 red and 1 of any, and it's got a colon, so you can do it as much as you can with the amount of mana that you have available. Goblin Banneret gets +2/+0 until end of turn. What that does is it makes his power higher, so he can make somebody else attack and get a +1/+1 counter. Lava Step Rider, 1 to cast 1/2. It's also a Goblin, but it's a Goblin Warrior. It has, for 1 red and 2 of any, it gets +2/+0, and it starts off as a 1/2. So more buffing. So we're doing Goblin Token Swarm, but it's really just Token Swarm, so the more stuff you can do to boost powers on creatures, the better off you're going to be. Goblin Bushwhacker, 1 red for a 1/1 Goblin Warrior as well. It has a kicker of a red, and it says when Goblin Bushwhacker enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, creatures you control get +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. It's really good in a Token Swarm deck because you might have a whole bunch of things out. You may have created a whole bunch of things in one turn and then given them haste and +1/+0. It's just a win from nowhere. Foundry Street Denizen, 1 to cast 1/1 Goblin Warrior. Whenever another red creature enters the battlefield under your control, Foundry Street Denizen gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So his power can get pretty high, especially if you're creating a lot of tokens. So there's that. Alright, a lot of the creatures in here, or a lot of the spells in here, create tokens. Here's one of them. Goblin Instigator is 2 to cast for a 1/1 Goblin Rogue. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red Goblin creature token. Goblin Lookout, 2 to cast for a 1/2. It's just a regular Goblin. I'm sure that if I looked it up, it would have another thing, but I can't remember off the top of my head if it does or not. Let's see. You can tap it and sacrifice a Goblin. I'm sorry. It's a 2 to cast 1/2 Goblin. And you can tap it and sacrifice a Goblin, and all Goblin creatures get +2/+0 until end of turn. So more buffing of your little creatures, little dudes. Alright, Mog War Marshal. 2 to cast, 1/1 Goblin Warrior with Echo. The Echo cost is 2. So if you don't pay it the next turn, the additional 2, he gets sacrificed. And then when he enters the battlefield or dies, you can put a 1/1 red Goblin creature token. So create a 1/1 red Goblin. So when it comes into play, it creates 1. When it dies, it creates 1. So you can get 3 total creatures out of this card. And with Grumgully out, they're 2/2s. Alright, Goblin War Driver, 2 red for a 2/2 Goblin Warrior. has Battle Cry. Battle Cry says whenever this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. With that, you have a lot more buffing for the entire board state you have. Pyre Wild Shaman. This actually was a rare when it was first put out. It's a 3 to cast, 3/1 Goblin Shaman. Has Blood Rush. Blood Rush is for 2, you can discard from your hand, and target attacking creature gets +3/+1 until end of turn. So you can ditch him to make something else if it gets through more, you can buff it. But then the nice feature on this guy is whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, if Pyre Wild Shaman is in your graveyard, you may pay 3 colorless, and if you do, you're going to turn it to your hand. So it gives you the ability to keep getting it back if you need to, especially later in the game when you have mana with nothing. Decks like Goblins usually have extra mana at the end of turns. So, alright. Krenko, Tin Street Kingpin, 3 to cast 1/2 Goblin. It's legendary, and whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then create a number of 1/1 red goblin creature tokens equal to Krenko's power. So he actually is not combo. It's more synergy with Grumgully, because if you have Grumgully out and you put him into play, he comes into play with the +1/+1 counter already. So he creates 2 right off the bat. So alright. NX Hardened in the Forge. It's 2 red and 1 for a star 3 demigod legendary enchantment creature. The star is equal to your devotion to red, so you count all the red mana symbols you control on your side, and then that's its power. And whenever NX or another non-token creature you control dies, you create a 1/1 red satyr creature with this creature can't block, and if the creature had power 4 or greater, you create 2 of those instead. You can get some of these creatures, the non-token creatures, up to power 4 easily. Some of them already have a high enough power that it's one Grumgully, trigger away from being able to put 2 tokens into play. Goblin War Chief, 2 red and 1 colorless for a 2/2 Goblin Warrior. Goblin spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and goblin creatures you control have haste. So I know that there are non-goblins in here and non-goblin token creators, but the majority is goblins, so you wanted to kind of make them have a little bit of an advantage. Goblin Freerunner is 1 red, 3 of any for a 3/2 Goblin Warrior ally with a surge cost of 2, and surge says that you may cast a spell for its surge cost if you played another spell this turn. You were a teammate, but you're playing Commander, so there's no teammates unless you are playing, I think it's Emperor. And then it has Menace, which means it can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. So next, Siege Gang Commander. It's 2 red, 3 of any for a 2/2 Goblin. When it enters the battlefield, put 3 1/1. It basically says create 3 1/1 red Goblin creature tokens. Has a second ability of 2 and sacrifice a Goblin. Siege Gang Commander deals 2 damage to target creature or player. This is in here because this can fuel most of your token generation if you can keep getting it back. And there is a way to do that. Just so you know, I have a plan. Battle Squadron. It's 2 red, 3 of any for a star Goblin. It has flying, and the stars are equal to the number of creatures you control. So Goblin token or token swarm, you get a lot of little dudes. This guy becomes a big dude. Zerta Goblin, green and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Berserker, has Riot, and Riot again is this creature enters the battlefield with your choice of a +1/+1 counter or haste, and that's it. Here's Riot. Sunder Shaman was a include for this deck for a little bit of tech, not so much for the fact that it's a creature. It's a giant shaman, so it doesn't follow the form of goblins. It's not a token maker, and it's not a token. So why is it in here? So it's 2 green, 2 red. It's a 5/5, so it's a 4 to cast 5/5. Right off the bat, that's pretty good. It can't be blocked by more than 1 creature, so they can chump block it but they can't jump block to kill it. And whenever Sunder Shaman deals combat damage to a player, destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls. That's the reason he's in here. It's not so much for the fact that he's got, a big power toughness for converted mana cost. It's always the bonus, but he is more of a utility card to get rid of opponent's stuff. Emrakul's Hatcher. It's 1 red, 4 of any for a 3/3 Eldrazi drone. Yes, I know we're going to finally start getting into the non-goblin stuff. So, when Emrakul's Hatcher enters the battlefield, you put 3/0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens onto the battlefield. They have sacrificed them to add a colorless to your mana pool. So, with Grumgully out, they actually become 1/2s, and there's 3 of them. That's why it's in here. Rapacious one, 1 red, 5 of any. It's an Eldrazi drone as well. It's a 5/4. Has trample himself. Whenever Rapacious one deals combat damage to a player, put that many 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens onto the battlefield that have they sacrifice them to add a colorless. What that means is that for each damage he deals to anything, to a player, create a 0/1 spawn creature token. And with trample, he usually can get 1 or 2 in. Alright, I'm going to explain this. I'm going to hope to explain it correctly. There is a reason for this guy. He looks kind of dumb, he looks kind of stupid, but there is... This deck doesn't have the ability to go infinite, but only because budget restrictions said so. I've made it so that if you were to purchase this deck and you had a couple cards lying around that could help it, that would make it great. There are a few things out of the budget range of this deck that could make this go infinite just because of this card right here. So, Scuzzback Marauders. It's a hybrid green-red and 4 of any for a 5/2 Goblin Warrior. Has trample and then persist. And persist reads as such. When this creature dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 counter on it. So if it dies and it didn't have anything on it at all, it comes back into play with the -1/-1 counter. I have, him and Grumgully itself could technically be, or actually technically is infinite itself. You just need a sack outlet to make it happen. So let me explain. Grumgully says whenever a non-human creature comes into play, it comes in with an additional +1/+1 counter. Scuzzback says when he dies, he comes back into play with a -1/-1 counter. Wizard's ruling on this is that if a creature has a +1/+1 counter and a -1/-1 counter on it, they cancel each other out and fall off. So, if you have a way to sack this creature over and over, and I did put one in there, but it's not a free one. So, if you can find a way to get value, and I will explain the actual cards that I'm talking about in a minute, you can go infinite with either mana or damage. It just depends on what you use as your sack outlet and what benefits you get from it. So, my first choice is always Ashnod's Altar. And I will go ahead and I will put that up here so you can see what Ashnod's Altar is. If you don't know what it is, I'll go ahead and I'll superimpose it on the screen. Ashnod's Altar is a 3-to-cast artifact that for free you can sacrifice a creature and gain 2 colorless. With Grumgully and Scuzzback on the field, you can sacrifice it to add 2 and then bring Scuzzback back infinitely because, that's what it does. I have no use currently in this build for infinite mana because I didn't have the sack outlet because monetarily it didn't fit the budget. But if you were to purchase this deck, I would definitely go ahead and acquire an Ashnod's Altar or the Phyrexian Altar, which adds a red, it adds, you sacrifice a creature to add any one of any color. Either way, it's mana that basically piles up, and then I would add something like a Fireball and what is the other one? It's not Incinerate, but a Fireball-like effect. There are many of them in red. That's my first foray into how I would upgrade this deck if I was to purchase this. So, with that being said, there's also Lesser Masticore. So he's a 2-to-cast 2/2 artifact Masticore creature. He says as an additional cost to cast this spell, only cast it, you discard a card. For every 4 you pump into him, you can deal damage to target creature, so you can basically shotgun creatures. Oh, look, there's an outlet for the infinite mana if you get it. And he himself has Persist, so same thing. Since he has Persist and Grumgully has Persist, here's the thing. When he comes back with the Persist ability, you don't have to discard a card, so there's that. And then the other thing. I added a Triskelion in here. For those of you who are uninitiated with Triskelion, this is the original infinite damage king. Okay, so he's 6 to cast. He's a 1/1. He's an artifact creature. I think he's a construct. When it comes into play, put 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and then for free, for 0, whatever you want to do, the actual cost is to remove one of the tokens. It's remove a token, one of the +1/+1 counters. Sorry, not token counter. Remove one of the counters, deal damage to target creature or player. So if he had Persist somehow, some way, with Grumgully, he can, and you had a sack outlet because he is a 1/1 himself. So he comes into play with originally with 4 counters if you have Grumgully out. You can remove the counters to ping things left and right. If you have a sack outlet, you can sack it. And if he had something like Undying or Persist, he could come back into play with the counters again. So let's keep that in mind when I go through even further. Alright? So those are the creatures for Grumgully. It's not horrible. I've seen a lot worse. Up next we have spells that are basically token generation. So up first, Satyr's Cunning. 1 to cast sorcery. Create a 1/1 Satyr creature token with this creature can't block. The reason this is in here is because of the escape. Escape says for 3 you can exile another 2 other creatures. Let me read it again. Escape says for 3 exile 2 other cards from your graveyard, and you may cast this card from your graveyard for its escape cost. So for 3 and exiling 2 other cards, you get to cast it over and over again. Kuldotha Rebirth is 1 to cast sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you have to sacrifice an artifact. I'll get to that in a minute. Put 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield. I have added a couple of artifacts in here that you can sacrifice. Release the Gremlins. 1 red and double X. So that means for each one you want to do, you have to pay 2. It's destroy X target artifacts and create X 2/2 red goblin creature tokens. This is in here as defense, but also a bonus of getting 2/2s out of it. Krenko's Command and Dragon Fodder are both the same card in essence. They're 1 red, 1 of any, and they both say put 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield. Basically create 2 1/1 red goblins. And I'm sorry if I'm going off the camera, but Firecat Blitz, 2 red X. Put X 1/1 red cat creature tokens with haste into play, and then remove them from the game at the end of turn with a flashback of 2 red and sacrifice X mountains, so you can play this late game twice. Goblin Gathering, 3 to cast sorcery. Create a number of 1/1 red goblin creature tokens equal to 2, plus the number of cards named Goblin Gathering in your graveyard. Obviously, this is only going to get you 2. Goblin Slide, 1 red, 2 of any. It's an enchantment. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may pay 1 colorless. If you do, put a 1/1 red goblin creature token with haste onto the battlefield. You do not have to sacrifice that one. Make Mischief, 3 to cast. Deals 1 damage to our creature or player. And then you put a 1/1 red devil creature token onto the battlefield, and it has, whenever this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Hordling Outburst, 2 red and 1 sorcery. Put 3 1/1, create 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Molten Birth, 2 red and 1 sorcery again. This one's create 2 1/1 red elemental creature tokens. But then you can flip a coin, and if you win the flip, you can return Molten Birth to your hand, so you can get multiple casts out of it. Goblin Wizardry, 1 red, 3 of any. It's an instant. Create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens with prowess, and prowess is whenever you cast a non-creature spell, they get +1/+1 until end of turn. Empty the warrens, 1 red, 3 of any sorcery. Put 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield with Storm, and Storm says whenever you cast this spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. This includes your opponents. You're in commander. You're probably going to see 5 or 6 spells played in a turn. Your turn most likely if you're playing against blue. And then you just throw this out there and create a whole bunch of tokens. Dance with the Devils. 1 red, 3 of any instant. Put 2 1/1 red devil creature tokens onto the battlefield. They have, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. I think that was errated to any target with new wordings, but I don't remember. Goblin War Party. 1 red, 3 of any. You can choose to follow between the following. Create 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. That's what we're going to do. Or creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain haste until end of turn. However, you can entwine this so you can get both for an additional 3. So late game, you can create 3 tokens and give them haste and +1/+1. Grumgully's out. They're 3/3 hasters when you cast this if you play it out right. Goblin Rally, 2 red, 3 of any. It's a sorcery, and you create 4 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Goblin Scouts, 2 red, 3 of any. Create 3 1/1 red goblin scouts with Mountain Walk. That's what that does. I mean, it reads differently, but it creates 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens with Mountain Walk. So that's that section. Defensively, I don't have a whole lot here. I have Street Spasm. I like Street Spasm in a deck like this. For 1 red and X, it says Street Spasm deals X damage to any target creature without flying you don't control. So any ground creature that you don't control, it deals X damage to. Or for 2 red and double X, you can deal it to all creatures you don't control without flying. So it's a board. It's not a, how do I put this? It's not a board wipe per se, but it can be. Wilt, 2 to cast instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and it has cycling of 2. Far superior to the other version of this. I'm not sure why anybody would not play this over that. It's same thing, only it has cycling. Same thing with this. I don't know why. These two are more, way better than the original version, which was exactly this, but pay 2 and destroy target artifact or enchantment. But Wilt has the ability to cycle, so you can get rid of it if you don't need to. And then Return to Nature gives you an additional option. So you can choose between the following. Destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or exile a target card from a graveyard. Anything that does a little bit more. I mean, it's power creep, but if you're going to have power creep, you might as well use it, right? Alright. This is the utility section. This is just cards that just do things to do things that we need. So, Goblin Grenade, 1 red. You can sack a goblin and it deals 5 damage to anything. Straightforward, pretty simple. Insult to Injury. The insult part is 3 to cast sorcery. Damage can't be prevented this turn. If a source you control would deal damage this turn, it deals double that damage. So, just keep that in mind. The injury part reads, Aftermath, you can only cast it from your graveyard and exile it. And then it deals 2 damage to target creature and 2 damage to target player. Alright, Massive Raid, 2 red and 1 of any instant. It deals damage to target creature or player equals the number of creatures you control. So it could be basically a killer and a game ender if it's, you know, a pot of 4 and you want to get somebody out of the game and you have a massive board state but you can't attack them, Massive Raid them. Trumpet Blast, 3 to cast, instant attacking creatures get +2/+0 until end of turn. This is where this one gets good. Your creatures get +2/+0 if they're attacking. But imagine if your opponents are fighting amongst each other and they just need that little oomph to knock one of your other opponents off the board. You can actually Trumpet Blast their stuff too. Quest for the Goblin Lord, 1 red. Whenever a goblin enters... I'm sorry, it's a 1 red enchantment. Whenever a goblin enters the battlefield under your control, put a quest counter on Goblin Lord. Quest for the Goblin Lord. As long as it has 5 or more counters on it, creatures you control get +2/+0. And that's not till end of turn, that's just a static +2/+0. Alright, Overcome, and actually I'm going to do this in 2. Overcome and Overrun. So they're two different cards. They essentially do the same thing. So for 5 Overcome, for 5, which is 3 green instead of 2 green, Overrun. Each one does the same thing. So Overcome gives them +2, gives all your creatures +2/+2 in trample. Overrun gives +3/+3 in trample. It's basically to help end the game. It's if you swarm and you get through, or you can't get through, you can trample through. Fires, if you have a Maya, a green, a red, and 1, it's an enchantment, and your creatures have a static ability of haste. And then you can sacrifice fires if you have a Maya to give a creature +2/+2 until end of turn. This used to be really good back in Invasion block. In this scenario, you're not using it for the +2/+2, you're kind of using it for the haste. Now, I have said earlier that there was a way to sacrifice creatures that are going to die anyway. This is not the free one. I told you what one I would use, but for now, let's go with this one. It fits the budget. It's a 2 to cast enchantment. You can pay 1 and sacrifice an artifact or a creature, and makeshift munitions will deal 1 damage to target creature or player. The only caveat to this is it's like Goblin Bombardment is another one. I say that a lot in my budget stuff because Goblin Bombardment is essentially the king of all sack outlets for red. And for most colors, if you're in red, you play Goblin Bombardment for creature sacking. This fills the gap monetarily speaking for the budget. It's essentially the same thing as Goblin Bombardment, but has the added ability of an artifact, and it costs 1 to do. Mirror Match, 1 red, 5 of any. It's an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, flip a coin. Flip it until you lose a flip. For each flip you've won, create a token that's a copy of that creature, and those tokens gain haste. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. Can you imagine if you have this on the board and you throw out Goblin, what the was his name? This guy right here. I gotta bring it up because it's actually funny. Siege Gang Commander, and you win like 4 or 5 flips. That's a lot of tokens that you create in one damn turn. I'm not saying you're going to be that lucky, but you could. Anyway, so that's what that mirror match does. Samet, Tyrant Smasher, hybrid, 2 green and 2 red, 2 of any, 5 loyalty counters. It's a legendary Samet Planeswalker. Static ability of creatures you control have haste, and then for a -1 loyalty, you can actually give a creature +2/+1 in haste, and then try 1. People have asked, why does the ability that it has and the ability that it gives both give haste? Because if Samet leaves the battlefield for any reason before your attack, your creatures don't have haste anymore. But if you use the -1 to give one of the creatures, it still has haste. That's why that's the way it is. The little bit of tech in here that I wanted to show you that I didn't get to, and I was kind of keeping a secret. Cauldron of Souls. 5 to cast artifact, and each of those creatures gains persist until end of turn. Remember, persist is when it dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, it comes back into play with a -1/-1 counter. Again, with Grumgully, it negates the -1/-1 counter, so you can do a full-on attack, giving all of your creatures, if Grumgully's in play, just leave Grumgully back. Give them all persist, they all die, they all come back. This is the card that if you can figure out the other way to make this untap infinitely, I know there's ways to do it. Not in the colors that we are in right now that I can think of, but monetarily speaking, it's not viable for a budget deck, but there are ways to untap this infinitely. So this enables infinite shenanigans, I guess I'll say. So this is that little bit of tech in there. That'll make it so that you can keep bringing creatures back and bring them back and bring them back because Grumgully negates the -1/-1 counter. Hornet Cannon. I said that I put a couple of artifacts in here that you can sacrifice. These are not throwaways. These are actually, fodder creators is what I'm going to say. So, Hornet Cannon's a 4 to cast artifact. You pay 3 and 3 and tap it, put a Hornet token into play. It's a 1/1 artifact creature token with flying and haste, and then you destroy it at the end of the turn. The Hive, 5 to cast. It's 5 and tap it, put a Wasp token into play. It's a 1/1 artifact creature with flying. this is kind of your way of being able to defend against flying, because red and green don't really do that often. So this is my way of doing double duty, creating tokens because you want to. None of them are human tokens, by the way. You gotta keep that in mind. None of them are humans. These are hornets, these are wasps. So they get the +1/+1 counter from Grumgully. And Serpent Generator, 6 to cast. Pay 4, tap it, put a poison snake. Basically, create a 1/1 snake token that has poison. And basically, it means it's almost like infect, but without giving the creatures -1/-1. So, the creatures, when they hit somebody, like a player, it gives them poison counters. And of course, we know that with infect, with 10 poison counters, somebody loses the game. So, this is in there just because it's kind of funny to sit there and watch. If you put one of these out there with Grumgully, and then you also have in there something that gives additional +1/+1 counters, like for instance, I will say this guy, the Banneret with Mentor. So if you can make it a 3/3 or a 4/4 at some point, you go ahead and make little 1/1 snake tokens that have basically infect, but without the creature -1/-1 counters. And people actually get afraid of a 1/1 snake token, because they get hit way harder. Sneak in some trumpet blasting or, quest for the Goblin Lord, and you've now got something that's going to give a player 6 poison counters. So don't sleep on this card. I know it looks bad, but it really can change the tide of a game. You can actually infect or poison counter token a player out of the game out of nowhere, and then they're just sitting there going, well, what the hell just happened? Yeah, it can happen. So anyway, that is Grumgully the Generous, my Blues budget brews. I've, for all my budget decks, they are all available for purchase. Go ahead and contact me either here in the comment section below or on the Facebook page. I have a link for that in the description below. Like, subscribe, share. I'm going to ask you to do that every video. I know it gets boring, gets cold, but hey, I'm only at 151. I'd like to be at like 3,000 subscribers, but we'll get there. So anyway, that is my video for the week. Again, questions, comments, concerns, contact me on Facebook, send the message down below. Whatever you got to do to get hold of me. Like, subscribe, share. Again, I'm going to say it again just because I need you guys' help. I'd like to get this going a little bit faster. I'm trying to focus on this a little more, so I just want to get it out there. But anyway, that's my my video for the week. Hopefully next week we will get to some Zendikar Rising stuff. Better late than never, I guess. I'm looking for some. I did pick up a collector's booster, so I'm actually really excited to open that for you guys. So anyway, until next week, I will see you guys later.